welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are going to be painting one of my very favorites today, Van Gogh's Starry Night. But before we get started, let's make sure we have all that we need. So we have some paint. We have white, blue, brown, black, a dark yellow, a lighter yellow, and a green. We also have some brushes. We have kind of a larger, a medium, and a smaller brush. We have a cup of water to wash off our brushes and some kind of paper towel or something to dry off our brushes. Okay, so we are going to start with our biggest space, which is going to be our sky. So I'm going to take my biggest brush that I have. I'm going to give it a quick little dip in the water. I'm going to go in, I'm going to tap off on the paper so it's not all drippy. And I'm going to start with just blue by itself. Just blue by itself. And we're going to fill in all of our sky. I'm going to do nice long brush strokes. I'm going to paint around the little steeple, right into the edge of the mountain. And don't worry if you get a little bit of paint inside a line. We're going to cover up all the spaces later. While I have blue on my brush, I'm also going to wrap it around and paint the little side edges to match. So wherever I have that color, I'm going to wrap it around, get that top edge. And get this little side part here too. Okay, our next little step, we're going to fill in our ground color. So I'm going to do a little bit of a lighter blue. So I'm going to go right over here between my white and my blue. And mix a little white and blue together. I just want it a little lighter than my sky color. Once you have that color, I'm going to fill in all of my ground. I'm going to paint around the steeple. If you need to use a smaller brush to get some of the smaller, trickier spots, go for it. Again, don't worry too much if you get a long side. You can fill all those spaces in a little bit. We can wrap them around as well, get those little side edges. I'm leaving a little gap on the side for the hill color. I'm going to paint the bottom edge as well. I'm leaving a little spot open right there. Maybe a little bit, that's okay. It's going to be fine. While we're working over here in our ground, you can add a little bit of texture while that paint is still a little wet. I'm going to show you a couple ways. So don't even have to wash off your brush. You can get a little bit of the blue just by itself. Put a little bit of a shadow underneath those hills. So I'm going to go right underneath that. Sweep it underneath. And you're just grabbing that edge between the two colors, going across and blending it in. So it kind of goes dark to light. Gives it a nice little depth. I'm gonna do that a little bit over here too. Doesn't take much paint. Work it in like that. You can also add a little white. Put some highlights in your ground. I just want to give it just a little something, a little texture. Do as little or as much as you like. I'll add more once it's drying a little bit. So I'm gonna fill in my hills next. So I'm gonna make a darker blue, and I've switched to a medium brush. So not your biggest, not your smallest, the medium one. I'm gonna mix up a darker blue, so I'm gonna get a little bit of black paint. I'm gonna go over here to the side of my blue. I'm gonna mix it on up. Get a nice dark blue that I like. It's about there. Once you have a color that you like, you're gonna go over here in those little mountains. I'm gonna go a little bit darker. Little hills, little mountains. I'm gonna fill those in. I'm also going to get those little side edges. Okay, so we're gonna let that dry for a little bit. We'll come back over here a little later and add on some little houses and things. But we are going to add on our swirls next. So I am gonna find my smaller brush and I'm going to give it a little dip in the water, dry it off. And we're gonna start it off just sketching it out. Now we're gonna do just white paint by itself with my smallest brush. And I want for my first swirl to start over here, a little bit lower. It's gonna go up and swirl right in between our little cypress tree and our little steeple. So up and swirl right in here. We're gonna do that part first. So I'm gonna start a little lower. I'm just doing a little dashy line. You can cut right across. And I just want to make a little swirl. That is all. We're gonna make it a little bit bigger here in a sec. So my next swirl is gonna start underneath this one. So right in this little piece right in between these two. I'm gonna follow my first swirl. It's gonna be a little lower and curl on the other side of the steeple. So right in here, follow it and swirl. So with that little brush, we'll start right in here, gonna follow it. Just swirl right in here. So all the rest, we're just making it a little bit thicker. So I'm going to do more little dashy lines. They can overlap, they can touch, that's okay. bring that a little bit closer so you can see what we're doing. So as I'm going along, just making little dashing lines. Overlapping, making it a little bit bigger. Keep that swirl. And everyone's is going to be a little bit different, and that's okay. And do the same thing on this one. Okay, so we have our swirls on there. We're going to let those dry for a little bit, and then we'll come back and add some more colors to them. So our next biggest shapes in our sky, we have our moon and where we're going to put our stars. So we're going to do those next. Same brush, still white paint. I'm going to add my moon over here. This is my next biggest space over here. We're going to do a very similar thing, but instead of going in a swirl this time, we're going to go around in a circle. So I'm going to start in my middle. So I'm going to put my moon over here, and we're going to do dashy little lines, going around in a circle. We're going to have a little bit more space in between, but I do want the center of this space over here where I'm going to put the moon to be pretty well filled in the center, just so that when I put on my moon the yellow, it won't turn green because it's on too much blue, because yellow and blue will kind of turn green. So I want a lot of white on there to keep that from happening. I'm going to do little dashy lines. As I go further out, I can put a little bit more distance in between those lines, and that gives it kind of a glowier look. I'm going to do the same thing for all my stars. Whatever bigger spaces you have, you can add a little circle for a star, and you can put as many or as few as you want. So I have a good space over here, and a little thicker in the middle. Little dashes all around. As you get a little further, a little bit more distance in between those little dashes. And things can overlap, things can touch in the sky. Let me put one over here. I think it's good enough. I'll put maybe a little one right there. Whatever you have space. While I have the white on my brush, I'm also going to add a little bit of white over those little hills, like a little fog floating around. And I'm going to think about kind of the spirals of wind kind of moving this way. So I'm going to make that little fog kind of moving that way as well. So as I put on these little marks, I'm not going to go straight up, but I'm going to kind of follow it to the side. On the edge of the hill. we're painting to the side. And you can put as little or as much as you like. And that goes right to the edge of the hill. All the way across. I'm gonna put some over here too. And don't worry too much about getting it on your hilltops. We are going to kind of give it a little outline later. And if there's any bigger spaces we have left, maybe that one's a little bit bigger space, I might want to put an extra little star. I don't have to. We're gonna let that dry. Okay, so we're gonna let that dry for a little bit, and we're gonna go back over here to our little town. I'm gonna fill in my steeple next. So I'm gonna keep that small brush in my hand. For my steeple, I mixed up a little bit of even lighter blue. So I'm gonna go to that little bit of light blue that I have over here. I'm just gonna put a little bit more white mixed in. Of a lot lighter blue. And with that, I'm going to fill in my little steeple. It's okay if you get some on the lines. I just want to save a little bit of those lines to be able to trace it later. So as long as you smooth out your paint, you'll be able to see those lines underneath. I can still see my lines right there. Okay. We can also make some extra houses. So these guys are pretty simple shapes. Those are just little squares or rectangles. And then you can also add little triangles on top for rooftops. Later on we'll put some windows, doors, little straw rooftops on there. But for now, just little shapes. Maybe like one going off the edge. But if you want to do a kind of an extra building that has a little bit more of a 3D look, a little bit more, I'll do that one a little bit different. So I'll show you a little trick. So for those, I'm going to keep using my little brush. I washed it off and I dried it off. I'm going to start out with actually a little bit of black paint. So for a simple kind of 3D-ish house, I'm going to start out with the front of it. So I have two little walls, a little rooftop. I'm going to go over this one so I have some space. And I'm going to make a little triangle on top. So that's my start. And then whichever direction, however the side of your house, so this is the front of my house, wherever you want the side of your house to be, I'm going to put on this side so I don't cover up this little steeple here. I'm going to go out to the side, the end of the house, and then most important, this little angle right here, like the rooftop, I'm going to match that over here. So that's that angle, same angle, just a little rooftop on there. And it's a basic little 3D house. I'm going to wash off my brush, dry off my brush, and then we can fill it in with a color, or you can let it dry for a little bit and then fill it in with color. It's going to be a little bit wet paint right now, so it might mix in with the color that you're filling it in with and give it kind of a gray look, but I kind of like that. And fill it in. and then we'll add some more details on it in just a little bit. So after you have built in all of your houses, you've made all of the little houses that you'd like, we are going to let those dry for a bit, and we're going to go back over here to our sky, and we're going to add the yellow next. So I'm going to keep using my small brush. I washed it off really well, especially if you had a little bit of black paint on there. I'm going to dry it off, and I'm going to go into yellow. So I'm going to go into the brighter of the two yellows. Good amount on your brush. I want it in the moon and on the stars, a good amount in the middle, and then a little less as I get further out, a little bit more space, a little streakier, a little sweepier, mostly in the middle, and then a little wispy as I get a little further out, and a little closer on that. So I'm going to thicken the middle, and then a little less as I get out a little further. And do that to all my stars. Bring it out further into your sky and make that glowier look. I'm going to add just a little bit to my swirl. Every once in a while, not much. A little bit. And then lastly, to that little kind of fog over the mountain or hill. Just a little bit. So just to recap, I have a lot on my moon and stars. I have some in my swirl, and then a little bit in that fog over the mountains or hills. And while you have the yellow on your brush, if your little hill or little buildings are a little bit dry, that yellow is really good for if you have little windows, like for windows where the lights are on inside, for when people are awake. And you can also do a little highlight on the edge of a rooftop, the moonlight glowing on there. But we'll have time to add some more things on top, so don't have tafu if it's still a little bit wet paint. Okay, so we're gonna let that dry, and while we're letting it dry, I want all of my sky to have a little bit of texture, a little bit of paint brush strokes in it. So on all these little flat spots, I want just a little something there. So we're gonna do that next. I'm gonna take my smaller brush, I'm gonna wash it off, dry it off. And I can use a darker blue, I can use a lighter blue, I can use that blue just by itself again. But whichever blue, I'm gonna use that lighter blue I used for my steeple. And in all these little empty spots especially, I just want a little extra swirl. So I'm following around the shapes of my sky, kind of like ripples in a pond. They can definitely overlap. And I can also use a dark blue. I'm gonna use a little of that dark blue from my mountain, so you can really see it going around. The more brush strokes, the better. Going around my swirl, you can go in between. And the darker colors really help if you want to kind of shape maybe your swirl or one of your moons or stars. me shape it a little bit. That helps a lot. We want to make it smaller. Kind of shrinks it in. So I'm gonna fill in all of my sky with all that really beautiful texture. So you can go lighter blue, darker blue. Just want everything to have just a little something. You can use that blue just by itself, is also really nice. And a little closer so you can see. And even though it's like the same color on the same color sky, by adding another layer, it looks a little darker, but it still gives it, again, that nice texture. This is just the blue by itself. Add it all around. More the better layer. If you lose a little too much white, add a little bit more white. If you lose a little too much yellow, add some more yellow. All those brush strokes. The more the better. Layer it. Okay, good job everyone. So we are going to let that dry and we are going to fill in our cypress tree next. I'm going to find my medium brush again and I'm going to go in with just black paint, just by itself, with black paint. I'm just going to start out by filling in all of this space. Take it slow around those edges. If you need to use your smaller brush, go for it. If you'd like to use your bigger brush, go for it. Whatever you feel most comfortable with in your hand there. Fill in all that space. While I have the black paint on my brush, I'm also going to go over here to my mountains and give it a little trace. I'm trying to use the thinner part of my brush, but if you want to use that smaller brush, go for it. And you can also add extra little hills in between with the black paint. And then also while you have a little bit of black paint on your brush, you can add on your buildings little doors or little windows. And then with your smaller brush, we can give things a little bit of an outline. Following those edges around the steeple. I'm going to do the same thing around these little houses. And I'm not too worried about them being super straight lines. They're kind of sweepy, little brush strokey. So everything's all swirly and soft. So it doesn't have to be too straight of an edge. It's okay. On the top of the steeple, I'm going to add a few little lines. Going side to side. Now that I've done all the spots that need a little bit of black paint, I'm going to let this town dry a little bit. We're going to come back, add some more. But while this guy, by now he's a little bit drier, we can add a little bit of texture to it. So I'm going to keep using my medium brush, and colors we can add, because it is a tree, I can add brown. I'm using kind of the thinner part of my brush, and I can add little sweeps of brown. Bark texture, a bit of brown. I'm going to add a little of that green. We haven't used that green yet. We're going to be pretty dark, kind of blend with the black a little bit. That's kind of what we want. It's not really bright. So we have a little green, we have a little brown. And my last color, I'm going to add a little bit of white, just every once in a while. It's going to blend in a little bit. That's also kind of what we want, so it's a little softer looking. Some long lines, some shorter lines. Give a little texture. Don't have to put a whole bunch for once in a while. And if you do want this to be a little brighter white, just let it dry a little bit and then put some more on there. A little bit. Okay guys, it's moon and stars time. I'm going to use my smallest brush that I have, and I'm going to start with that moon. I'm going to use my dark yellow, and I'm going to make a big C shape. And then I'm going to find my center, and I'm just going to make the very center part just a little bit darker. It's going to be real easy to want to like keep going over that guy. If you want to make it kind of darker, just let it dry a little bit and then come back to it, add a little bit more. This is just going to keep getting bigger on you. And then I'm going to get a lot of paint, and for these little stars, I'm going to just kind of smoosh it on. Bring that a little closer. So for the little stars, I have a lot of paint, and I'm gonna tap, tap, tap. Tap on that paint. Gives it a nice little texture and makes it nice and dark. So while I have this dark yellow on my brush, I can add just a little bit to my swirl if I wanted, and then also a little bit to that cloud. We can also add a little bit to our town with this one. So this one's good for little straw rooftops. Straw rooftops. If you want to do any little pathways, maybe through your town, do short little squares like little cobblestones. And going down. And anywhere else you might want to add it, you can even just sweep a little bit once in a while if you want. Now, I always like to go back to my swirl, like at least one more time, check it out, see if I want more white on there, so I can really make it pop, and then kind of look over things, see if anything else needs a little bit of white. I'm going to use my smallest brush, and I'd like a little bit more white on my swirl. So I'm gonna go in with some white paint on my small brush, and I'm just gonna add a nice little last layer of white. Careful for your little tree there. And if there's any other little sips of white you want on your stars, if you want any last little textures of white in your town, in the ground, maybe a little highlight on the house. They're just optional little things. And then all the rest of our stubs are just anything else you want to add in your little town. So different things you can add. I'm going to keep using my smallest brush with maybe a little of that green. You can add like little bushes or things kind of next to a house and just tapping and lifting. Oh, a little bit of white. I kind of like that though. There. Distant trees in the background. One. This one I made like a little tree. You can do a little of that brown. A little Y shape. A little Y shape. Then a little of that green. Also that green and yellow, that bright yellow, makes it really pretty, kind of brighter green. You need it. It's kind of like a limey green. Just tap it around the top. A little tree. A little tree on there. And it's kind of plain, wherever you want, just like a little extra detail. You can add it to your top. So after you have all the details that you want on there, all the little details in your town and your sky, we need to find a very good spot for our artist signature. So I always like to put my initial on there, but if you want to put your full name, you can use a little bit of black paint in your smallest brush. If you have a Sharpie around, you can also use a Sharpie or a marker. But other than that, those are all of our steps. Great job today, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. We're gonna have to find a really good spot for this one up on the wall. Bye guys, thank you so much, and we'll see you next time. Bye.